You know. It's an illness I've got, sclerosis of the heart. The walls of the heart muscle wear out and get thin, and one fine day they may burst. I'm not yet 40, you know, and it isn't as if I were a drunkard, or burned the candle at both ends. Nonsense. We aren't playing your funeral march yet. You'll last us out. Microscopic forms of cardiac hemorrhages have become very frequent in recent years. They are not always fatal. Some people get over them. It's a typical modern disease. I think its causes are of a moral order. The great majority of us are required to live a life of constant, systematic duplicity. Your health is bound to be affected if, day after day, you say the opposite of what you feel, if you grovel before what you dislike and rejoice at what brings you nothing but misfortune. Our nervous system isn't just a fiction, it's a part of our physical body, and our soul exists in space and is inside us, like the teeth in our mouth. It can't be forever violated with impunity. I found it painful to listen to you, Innocenti, when you told us how you were re-educated and became mature in jail. It was like listening to a circus horse describing how it broke itself in. I must stand up for Dudorov, said Gordon. You've got unused to simple human words, they don't reach you anymore. It may very well be, Misha. But in any case, you must let me go now. I can hardly breathe. I swear, I'm not exaggerating. Wait a moment, you're just looking for excuses. We won't let you go until you've given us an honest, straightforward answer. Do you or don't you agree that it's time you changed your ways and reformed? What are you going to do about it? To start with, you must clarify your situation with Tonia and Marina. They are human beings, women who feel and suffer, not disembodied ideas existing only in your head. And second, it's a scandal that a man like you should go to waste. You've got to wake up and shake off your inertia. Pull yourself together and look at things without this impermissible arrogance. Yes, without this inexcusable haughtiness in regard to everyone, you must go back to work and take up your practice. All right, I'll give you my answer. I've been thinking something of this sort myself recently, so I can really promise you that there's going to be a change. I think everything will come out all right. And quite soon, at that. You'll see. I really mean it. It's already begun. I have an incredible, passionate desire to live. And to live always means to strive to move higher, toward perfection, and to achieve it. I am glad that you stand up for Marina, Misha, just as you always stood up for Tonia. But after all, I have no quarrel with either of them. I am not at war with them, or with anyone else for that matter. You used to reproach me at first because Marina said you to me and called me Yurii Androvich, while I said thou and Marina to her as though it didn't distress me too. But you know that the deeper causes of this unnatural behavior were removed long ago, and now we treat each other as equals. Now I can tell you another piece of good news. I've been getting letters again from Paris. The children are growing up, they have a lot of French friends of their own age. Sasha is about to graduate from the École Primaire and Masha is soon going to it. I've never seen her, you know. I have a feeling in spite of everything that although they've become French citizens, they'll soon be back and that everything will be straightened out in some way or other. It seems that Tonia and my father-in-law know about Marina and our children. I didn't tell them in my letters, but they must have heard about it from others. Naturally, Alexander Alexandrovich, as a father, feels outraged and hurt. That would explain why our correspondence was interrupted for almost 5 years. I used to correspond with him, you know, after I got back to Moscow, and then they suddenly stopped writing. Now, quite recently, they've begun writing again, all of them, even the children. They write very warmly and affectionately. For some reason they've relented. Perhaps Tonya has found someone else. I hope with all my heart she has. I don't know. I too write from time to time. But I really can't stay any longer. I must go or I'll get an attack. Goodbye. Next morning Marina came running into Gordon, greatly distressed. There was no one she could leave the children with, so in one arm she carried the baby wrapped in a blanket and with her free hand she was pulling Kapka, who trailed behind and dragged her feet. "Is Yurii here, Misha?" she asked in a frightened voice. "Didn't he go home last night?" "No. Then he must have spent the night at Innocentia's. I've come from there. Innocenti is at the university, but the neighbors know Yurii and they say he hasn't been there." "Where can he be, then?" Marina put Klashka down on the sofa, and then she began to sob hysterically. 8. For 2 days Gordon and Dudorov did not dare to leave Marina alone and took turns watching her and hunting for the doctor. They called at all the places he might conceivably have gone to. Flower Town, Sivtsev Vrajok, all the palaces of thought and academies of ideas he had ever been employed in. They looked up every friend of his they had ever heard him talk about and whose address they could discover, but with no success. They did not report him as missing to the police. Although he was registered and had no police record, it was better not to draw the attention of the authorities to a man who, by the standards of the day, lived anything but an exemplary life. They decided not to put them on his track except as a last resort. On the 3rd day, letters from Yurii Androvich came by different mails for all 3 of them, Gordon, Dudorov, and Marina. He was full of regret for the trouble and anxiety he had caused them. He begged them not to worry about him, and he implored them by everything that was holy to give up their search for him, saying that it would in any case be fruitless. He told him that in order to rebuild his life as completely and rapidly as possible, he wished to spend some time by himself, concentrating on his affairs, and that as soon as he was settled in a job and reasonably certain of not falling back into his old ways he would leave his hiding place and return to Marina and the children. He told Gordon that he was sending him a money order for Marina and asked him to get a nurse for the children, so that Marina could go back to work. He explained that he was not sending the money to her address for fear of someone seeing the receipt and her thus being exposed to the risk of robbery. The money soon came, and the amount far exceeded the standards of Yurii and his friends. The nurse was hired. Marina went back to work at the post office. She was still greatly upset, but, accustomed as she was to Yurii Andreevich's oddities, she eventually resigned herself to his latest whim. All 3 of them went on looking for him, but gradually they came to the conclusion that it was as futile as he had warned them it would be. They could find no trace of him. 9. Yet all the time he was living within a stone's throw, right under their eyes and noses, in the very middle of the district they were combing for him. On the day of his disappearance, he left Gordon and went out into Bronnaya Street a little before dusk. He turned straight toward home, but almost immediately, within less than 100 yards, he ran into his half-brother Evgraf, who was coming down the street toward him. He had neither seen him nor heard of him for more than 3 years. It turned out that Evgraf had just arrived in Moscow. As usual, he came quite unexpectedly, and he shrugged off all questions with a smile or a joke. On the other hand, from the few questions he asked Yurii Androvich, he gathered the gist of his troubles at once. And then and there, between one corner and another as they walked along the narrow, twisting, crowded street, he worked out a practical plan to rescue him. It was his idea that Yurii Androvich should disappear and remain in hiding for some time. He took a room for him in Kamerga Street, as it was still called, near the Arts Theatre. He provided him with money. He took steps to get him a good position in a hospital, with plenty of opportunity for going on with his research, and assisted him by his patronage. Finally, he gave him his word that the ambiguity of his family's situation in Paris would be resolved. Either Yurii Androvich would go to them or they would come to him. All these things Evgraf undertook to see to himself. As usual, his brothers helped put new heart into Yurii Androvich. As always before, the riddle of his power remained unsolved. Yurii Androvich did not even try to penetrate the secret. 10. His room faced south. It almost adjoined the theatre and looked out over the rooftops opposite. Beyond them, the summer sun stood over Okhotny Riad, and the street below was in shadow. To Yurii Androvich the room was more than a place for work, more than his study. At this time of devouring activity, when the pile of notebooks on his desk was too small to hold all his plans and ideas and the surplus floated in the air like apparitions as unfinished pictures stand with their faces to the walls in a painter's studio, his living room was to him a banqueting room of the spirit, a cupboard of mad dreams, a storeroom of revelations. Fortunately, Evgraf's negotiations with the hospital dragged on, and the start of Yurii Andreevich's new job was indefinitely postponed. The delay gave him time to write. He began by trying to sort out those of his earlier poems of which he could remember snatches or of which Evgraf somehow got him the texts. Opening parenthesis. These were manuscripts, some in his own hand, some copies made by others. Closing parenthesis. But the disorderliness of the material made him squander his energy even more than he was inclined to do by nature. He soon gave it up and turned to new work. He would make the rough draft of an article, like the notes he had kept when he first went to Varikino, or put down the middle, or the end, or the beginning of a poem as it came into his mind. There were times when he could hardly keep pace with his thoughts, even in his shorthand made up of initials and abbreviations. He was in a hurry. Whenever his imagination flagged, he whipped it up by making drawings in the margins of his notebooks. The drawings were always of forest cuttings or of street intersections marked by the sign Moreau and Vetchinkin, mechanical cedars, threshing machines. The articles and poems were all on the same theme, the city. 11. These notes were found later among his papers. When I came back to Moscow in 1922, I found it deserted and half destroyed. So it had come out of the ordeals of the first years after the revolution. So it remains to this day. Its population has decreased, no new houses are being built, and the old ones are left in disrepair. But even in this condition it is still a big modern city, and cities are the only source of inspiration for a new, truly modern art. The seemingly incongruous and arbitrary jumble of things and ideas in the work of the symbolists Bloch, Verheyen, Whitman is not a stylistic caprice. This is a new order of impressions, taken directly from life. Just as they hurry their succession of images through the lines of their poems, so the street in a busy town hurries past us, with its crowds and its brooms and carriages at the end of the last century, or its streetcars and subways at the beginning of ours. Pastoral simplicity doesn't exist in these conditions. When it is attempted, its pseudo-artlessness is a literary fraud, not inspired by the countryside but taken from the shelves of academic archives. The living language of our time, born spontaneously and naturally in accord with its spirit, is the language of urbanism. I live at a busy intersection. Moscow, blinded by the sun and the white heat of its asphalt-paved yards, scattering reflections of the sun from its upper windows, breathing in the flowering of clouds and streets, is whirling around me, turning my head and telling me to turn the heads of others by writing poems in its praise. For this purpose, Moscow has brought me up and made me an artist. The incessant rumbling by day and night in the street outside our walls is as inseparable from the modern soul as the opening bars of an overture are inseparable from the curtain, as yet secret and dark, but already beginning to crimson in the glow of the footlights. The city, incessantly moving and roaring outside our doors and windows, is an immense introduction to the life of each of us. It is in these terms that I should like to write about the city. There are no such poems in what has been preserved of Zhivago's work. Or does the one entitled Hamlet belong to this category? 12. One morning at the end of August, Yurii Androvich took the trolley at a stop at a corner of Gazetny Street which went up along Nikita Street to the Kudrinskaya terminal. He was going for the first time to his job at the Botkin Hospital, which was then known as the Soldatenko Hospital. He had been there before only once or twice for reasons connected with his job. He had no luck with his trolley. It had a defective motor and kept getting into trouble of every sort. Either its way was blocked by a cart in front of it with its wheels caught in the grooves of